Measure the difference dimension on the bevel gear wheel. To do this, you need the corresponding measurement plate, the dial gauge, and the corresponding holder. Place the gauge block with the corresponding height on the measurement plate. Then set the gauge to a pretension of 30 mm. Set the scale to 0. Remove the measurement piece again. Insert the bevel gear wheel and turn it during the measurement process. Ensure that the measuring tip is in the correct position on the bevel gear wheel. This is how you measure the difference dimension on the bevel gear wheel between the longitudinal dimension of the measuring piece and the actual dimension of the bevel gear wheel. Now read the value on the gauge. In our case, it is 20.32 mm. Record this preliminary difference dimension. Now you have to subtract the correction value of 14.97 mm from this dimension. The result is then 5.35 mm. You can read the dimensions for the next calculation on the removed differential. The basic dimension of the crown gear is engraved on it. Here it is 74.922 mm. Calculate the deviation from the set basic size. To do this, subtract the real basic size of the crown gear from the set basic size of the rear axle housing. 74.55 mm minus 74.922 mm. The result is minus 0.422 mm. A negative value means that the spacer disc will be thinner. Now for the next measurement. Now check the basic dimension of the rear axle housing. To do this, calibrate the measuring gauge to 0 and place it on the gauge block. The setting gauge must be flush with the flat surface. Important: set the correct pretension on the measuring gauge. And calibrate the external scale to 0. Now measure the rear axle housing. Fit the gauge block. This is followed by the gauge block with a dial gauge. The needle on the gauge must remain at the highest measuring point. We have a measurement of minus 0.47. Record this value as well. The next calculation determines the thickness of the spacer disc. This means the difference dimension of the bevel gear wheel, 5.35 mm, minus the deviation from the set basic dimension, namely minus 0.47 mm, minus the production deviation of the rear axle housing. This is minus 0.01 mm. As a result, the thickness of the spacer disc is 4.87 mm. Next, place the new spacer disc with the countersunk side towards the rear axle housing and the bearing shell in the rear axle. Then fit the draw-in tool. Now rotate the axle 90 degrees. Use a wrench to pull in the spacer disc and the bearing shell. After this, you can remove the draw-in tool again. At the end, remember to check the position of the drawn-in bearing shell. Then attach the bevel gear wheel. After this, fit the holding device onto the rear axle without pressure. There needs to be a small amount of play between the bevel gear wheel and the holder. For the next step, rotate the axle with the articulated flange side back to the top.